Hi, I'm Ed Balls, I'm a Labour MP. I'm also a Treasury Minister, and I posted a film on the YouTube Labour site 2 weeks ago asking you to send me in questions. We had loads of hits and actually quite a lot of questions, and I'll do my best to answer them today without going on too long. I'll answer all the ones where we've had more than one question on a topic, and we'll see how many we can get done. We're doing this in my office in the House of Commons, which is a pretty dull and dingy office. It's got no windows at all. As you can see, it's rather dreary. But it's also really convenient because just above us is the chamber of the House of Commons. The MPs are up there at the moment debating away. I've got a TV screen up there, you can't see it, but it tells me who's speaking, what's going on. And then if there's a vote, the bell rings, and if you're here under the chamber, you can get up to vote really quick. So if the bell goes, I'll have to go, but in the meantime, let's see how many we can get done. So, first set of questions is around the minimum wage. Question from Red Flag 85 asking whether it's discriminatory to have a lower wage for young people. There's also a question asking whether there's a danger that the minimum wage will disadvantage older people who have to be paid the same wage as everybody else. And those issues kind of take you to the big debate before 1997 about the minimum wage, where the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats both said that if we introduce a national minimum wage, it would cost jobs, it would be bad for the economy. And we've introduced this really carefully. We had a low pay commission with employers, the trade unions, experts, introduced it in 1999 in a careful way, and the fact is we've had a national minimum wage and we've had employment going up, not down, 2 million more jobs, actually employment rising more for older people as well. So the idea that the minimum wage would cost jobs or be bad for the economy, I think entirely discredited as an idea. It's a great achievement of this government. But we've done it carefully, and that's particularly meant doing it carefully for young people. We have had a lower minimum wage for under 21s, and we've also introduced a new national minimum wage for 16 and 17-year-olds, but at a lower level. And the reason is that the most important thing to do is get people into work, but also into training. We want people to be in college, get an apprenticeship, staying on at school. And if you get a high minimum wage, the danger is you make it harder for people to stay on or to get training in work. We've actually introduced a thing called educational maintenance allowances, which are about making sure that we incentivise people with money to stay on at school. And I think that's a much better way to go. But as I said, the minimum wage is actually one of the proudest achievements of the Labour government so far, tackling social justice but also making the economy strong. A second set of questions around PFI, the Private Finance Initiative. Question from Alison KF asking whether this is about privatising public services. A question from Denton KMCD asking about value for money and borrowing. I do not believe that privatising our public service is the right way to go. We don't want a privatised National Health Service or a privatised education system. But the PFI scheme is actually about delivering value for money in the delivery of those public services, and in particular binding private contractors, private companies into delivering better value for money. In the old days before PFI, it was still the case that these private companies were building the hospitals, the schools, the tube lines, but they used to do so and then walk off and often leave shoddy buildings. They were often late, they were often over budget. The thing which the PFI has done is bound them in for the long term. 9 out of 10 PFI contracts actually come in on time, all of them on the budget which has been agreed, delivering much better value for money. We've only got 100 new hospitals, more than 100, being built or in the pipeline because of the PFI, thousands more schools being built or refurbished. We can only do that because we're getting value for money by making sure the private sector can fulfil its responsibilities. And that's actually what PFI is about, not about privatisation. A few questions about pensions. Question from about pensions paid abroad from Newcastle 1986, who asks whether we uprate pensions for citizens living in other countries in line with inflation. The answer is we do that, but only if that country also pays pensions uprated in line with inflation to their citizens living in Britain. And I think it's fair that we should have that kind of agreement in place. Also, there's a question from I'm not sure if I can pronounce this called Melodin 65, who asked about the dividend tax credits issue. There was a debate upon this upstairs in the House of Commons a week or so ago about the dividend tax credit. Basically, in 1997, we had to take some tough decisions to make the Bank of England independent, to get the fiscal position strong for the economy, to make sure that we got investment on a long-term footing. That was one of those decisions. I think it was the right decision then. I actually think it's the right decision now. In retrospect, looking back 10 years, the Tories opposed it then. They say they oppose it now, but they will not say they'll reverse it because they can't tell us where they get the money from to pay for it. And the fact is, taking difficult decisions is what being in government's all about, and that's what we've had to do, and that's a good example of that. Also, there's another question from about people who lose their pensions because of employers going bankrupt, and that's one important issue I know from my own constituency. That if you lose your pension because your employer goes bankrupt, it's a disaster for the family. It's hugely frustrating. It's totally unfair. We put in place a new system called the Pension Protection Fund, where employers pay into a pot, which means that there's a fund ready. So if an occupational scheme then goes bust because the employer goes out of business, there's money there to help those pensioners. And I think that's the right and fair approach to take. But we've also had to deal with history as well, those people who lost out before that was in place. And we introduced a thing called the Financial Assistance Scheme. We actually put £8 billion in the budget into that fund for the coming years to make sure that thousands more pensioners can get the support they need. And I personally know that that's also the fair thing to do. It's right that we make a contribution to make sure people aren't, so unfairly disadvantaged by things happening which are no fault of their own at all. Questions about housing. 3 questions about housing. One from Gordon Flash 321. I'm not sure what Gordon Flash is referring to there, but anyway, what's more important, keeping house prices stable or economic growth? There's also a question about from a study mix about whether we're doing enough to help first-time buyers. We've actually done quite a lot in the last few budgets to help first-time buyers. Introduce a threshold where you start paying stamp duty from 60,000 up to 120,000 up to 125,000, so that these days pretty much half of first-time buyers pay no stamp duty at all. But there's a limit to what we can do on stamp duty to solve what is a bigger problem, which is that there are more people in our society these days wanting to buy a house or rent a house, but we've just not been building enough houses where people want to live now for too many years. And the problem, if that happens, if there's more people trying to buy a house and there aren't enough houses, the price goes up. And that's not only bad for the economy and bad for economic growth, but it's also really unfair on first-time buyers. The only solution to that in the end is to build more houses. And that's, I think, what we've got to do and what we are doing as a government. It's got to be done in a fair way, it's got to be affordable, you've got to make sure the homes are where people want to live, but in mixed communities. We've also got to make sure we do so in a way which protects the environment, doesn't damage the valuable parts of the green belt which we've got to protect. But the fact is, the Conservative Party, the front bench, consistently, all the ministers, the shadow ministers, consistently oppose in their areas the very housing schemes which we need to deliver fairness for first-time buyers. I don't think you can, with any credibility, come along and say we're on the side of hard-working families and first-time buyers if you're stopping building the homes we need as a country to build. A couple of questions on the budget and income tax, about the 10p rate, about the 2p cut in the basic rate. We did simplify the tax system in the budget, 2 rates, 20p and 40p, aligning them with national insurance, trying to make the tax system work in a simpler way, but we also put a lot more money into the working tax credit and the child tax credit, took hundreds of thousands of pensioners out of tax altogether, also 200,000 children out of poverty, to make sure that that budget was about simplicity but also about fairness. The fact is, since 1997, we've now taken over 600,000 children out of poverty, fastest fall in child poverty of any country in Europe. That comes after a doubling of child poverty under the Tories. But it's not enough. We've set what is a really ambitious goal to abolish child poverty in a generation, to get it halved by 2010. It's going to take really hard work to make sure we deliver on that, on those commitments in the coming years. But I think it's right that we try and be ambitious and to get the money to families, to childcare, to supporting work. And we need to keep moving forward to meet our child poverty goals. to deliver on our commitments to those families. Question about nurses' pay and the difficult decision which we took to stage the pay increases recently. We had to take tough decisions on pay in the public sector, and people are making them all the time in the private sector to make sure that pay stays sustainable and affordable for the economy. Everybody remembers what it was like in the bad old days of the economy 10, 20, 30 years ago, when pay was out of control, when inflation got out of control, when interest rates were soaring into double figures. Nobody wants to go back to those days. But at the same time, I think we've got to do more to show public sector workers that we really value the work they're doing, the contribution they're making to strong public services, and that includes particularly nurses. We've got tens of thousands more nurses. Nurses' pay in the last few years has been rising faster than in the private sector. For a first-time nurse, a newly qualified nurse, their pay's gone up from £12,000 in '97 to nearly £20,000 a year now, which recognises the contribution that they make. They are playing a hugely important role in our National Health Service, and I'm also really proud to say that it's a Labour government which is continuing to deliver a free at the point of use National Health Service based on need, not ability to pay, and that's a cornerstone of our achievements as a government, carrying on the work of the 1945 government which first introduced our National Health Service. Question from Tula123. These names. Tula123, who says, do you think that not going into the euro was a mistake? I think the answer to that is no. We looked at this really carefully, what it would mean for the national interest, for jobs, for investment, and we concluded that not joining the euro was the best thing for our economy. And I think that 4 years on, that's still the right decision for Britain. But at the same time, I and our party, the Labour Party, was strongly pro-European. That whether it's on the economy, tackling climate change, tackling global poverty, you can't achieve those goals without cooperation, close cooperation with our European partners. And the fact is, this is a pro-European party. The Conservative Party today is more anti-European than I think it's ever been. It's more anti-European than when Margaret Thatcher was leading it and when they at that time introduced the European single market. You can't deliver on jobs and social justice or be credible on the environment unless you work with your European partners, and it's only Labour as a party of government which is actually delivering on that. Question from JPFX Pierce about loan sharks. How can we see money going to loan sharks and doorstep lenders? This is a really important issue, and we've got to crack down. We've got projects in Birmingham and Glasgow already which are not only about tackling the violence of these extortion lenders, but also making sure that the lenders themselves are brought to book. I've been up to Birmingham and seen films of hundreds of people going to houses handing over money. We've got to deal with it, and in 2 weeks' time I'm launching a project in Leeds as well to crack down on this illegal lending. But it's not just enough to tackle the illegal lending. You've also got to provide a decent alternative which is affordable for families who get into these difficulties, as well as proper advice. And I think one important role, and I as a Labour and Cooperative MP, I think this is a big deal. We need more credit unions offering more support in local communities at affordable rates for people who need to save or need to borrow. And I think expansion of credit unions in our country is very important for the next few years. Finally, question from Bexardo, who says, why aren't you putting forward younger candidates? He says he's 17, can't join the Labour Party, and can't stand as a candidate. Actually, we have changed the rules for local elections so that rather than being 21 as it used to be, this year you can stand as a local election candidate if you're 18 or over. You can actually join the Labour Party if you're 15 or over. So my message to Bexardo is join up. And I was actually out in Leeds last weekend with a bunch of students there in Morley campaigning. And of that group of students, quite a few of them were actually standing in the local elections which are coming up next Thursday. So my message to you out there is, if you're thinking of join the Labour Party, if you're thinking of voting in next Thursday's local elections, I hope you'll vote Labour. To those Leeds students who came out and campaigned with me, good luck if you're standing, and thanks for all your hard work and help with us in our local election campaigning. And thanks very much indeed for watching.